chapter 2, realism, right? Chapter 3, liberal theory, liberalism. I think that next week, which is 추석 holiday, we have a Tuesday. Still we have a Tuesday class. Then the week after the next, Thursday, we're going to have a first quiz. Friday. Friday, the week after the next, which is, what date is that? 27? 27, 2 o'clock here, first quiz. Covering chapter 1, 2, 3. Chapter 1 to 3. Then the first week of October, we cover chapter 4, 5. Chapter 4 and 5. Right? Chapter 4 and 5. Then the second week, I'll be gone for a conference in London and Shanghai. Second week of October. Then you have a full week left. So before I leave, I'm going to try to cover until chapter 6. Before I leave, I'm going to cover chapter 6. Then the second week of October, the second quiz. Second quiz, which will be covering 4, 5, 6. Chapter 4, 5, 6. Right? This is how we... Yeah, Friday, sorry. Friday, second week of Friday. So this is the speed of this class. Okay? So chapter 6, that's the speed we go. So we pretty much, we should go quite quickly. Problem is there's lots of information here. I'll try to cover as much as possible. Now, realism. Here, this book, if you go to figure 2.1, figure 2.1 lays out several theoretical frameworks of IR. Several theoretical frameworks. Right? Each theory comes in various forms in terms of level of analysis, like I said last time. Right? Different theoretical frameworks are founded on different levels of analysis. Like for instance here, mainly we have first, realist theoretical framework, which is realism. Then we have liberal theoretical framework, which is liberalism. Then we have constructivist theoretical frameworks. Then Marxist, postmodernist. These are all theoretical frameworks. And the focus of chapter 2 is realist framework. Realist framework. The theoretical framework, realist theoretical framework, is the center of IR. I want to emphasize that. Of all the different theoretical frameworks, realist theoretical framework has held a central position in the study of IR. And the principle, foundation, realism foundation, is the principle of dominance. Do you remember the 3 coping methods? Dominance, reciprocity, identity. Of these 3 coping methods, realism is founded on the principle of dominance. In other words, This school of thought explains international relations in terms of power. In other words, international politics, simply speaking, is realpolitik, power politics. It's important to first compare and contrast realism and liberalism. Okay, to define, to understand better realism. Oftentimes, realism, liberalism are compared. Now, before we compare more directly realism, liberalism, let me just lay out several key characteristics of liberalism first. Okay, then we compare. I have already mentioned realism's foundation is dominance, right? Meaning that reciprocity, identity are foundations of other different theoretical frameworks. Why don't you first quickly go over this first. Now, see, realism is kind of difficult to explain, but the main thing you should know about realism is that how different scholars treat international relations differently. You see, the basic, as we understood, the basic function, the basic unit of international relations, we learned in chapter 1, the state, the government, right? Let me ask you, the states, from state A to state Z, they all have different, domestic structures, different cultures, different history, right? Different political system, right? Different ideologies, and all that. The main thing you should understand about realism is that, let me ask you, does realism care about those different qualities of different states? In comparing realism and liberalism, how do realists, in understanding international relations, how do they treat different states? Commonsensically, different states come in all different forms, right? Do realists consider all these different qualities of states? Do they take this into consideration in understanding international relations? Okay. Like how, for instance? Then essentially international relations is what then? What moves international relations then? Yeah. Power. Okay. What? 원천. Hmm? Uh-huh.
Yeah, because I think, basically they're using power to make something for their interest, and on the other hand, also protect themselves from the dangers from other states.
Okay. Pretty good. So this is it. From realist perspective, number one, power is predominant over all other different qualities of states, including morality, ideology, other social and economic structures, economic aspects of life. Okay? In other words, ideologies do not matter for realists. Okay? Ideology do not have any effect on international relations. Okay? Believe it or not. Ideology doesn't matter. Okay? Regardless of ideology, wars break up. That's what it means. Regardless of social structures, regardless of different cultures, wars break up. Okay? Religion doesn't matter. Okay? Cultural factor doesn't matter. So, realists see, I'm just stating from the text 45, page 45, right below figure 2, table 2.1, realists, let me emphasize this, realists see states with very different religions, ideologies, economic systems, as quite similar. Okay? In terms of effect on international relations, regardless of all these different qualities, outcome, same. Okay? What counts at the end, what counts is power. Okay? And power is defined by not sub-state actors, but only the state, the government. Okay? Because the government is always rational. How arrogant is that, right? Very arrogant perspective. So realism is a school of thought that explains international relations in terms of power. Okay? Now, go back again. Talk a little bit about realist, some historical legacy of realism. Okay? Where did realism originate? Okay? Historically, there are several important realist philosophers, realist thinkers. Okay? There are some seminal books, okay, and works, okay, then that later shaped this kind of realist thinking. Okay? Realism prospered when? When was the time that realism was in full swing? This kind of thinking. Okay, this kind of arrogant thinking about international relations, which is realism, when did it flourish? Was in full swing? After World War II, right? That was the heyday. Cold War era was the heyday. This was how people and government policymakers, this is how they looked at international relations. Power is important, okay? All other factors don't matter. They don't care. Okay? So Cold War era was the heyday of realism. But realism is has a long history. From Chinese history, Sun Tzu, 2,000 years ago, what did he say about international relations? Already 2,000 years ago, what did this famous Chinese thinker say about international relations? He was teaching Chinese politicians regarding how to survive in warring states. There were many wars. And he was teaching these Chinese politicians the world of international relations is the war of, right? Like a competition among states. So he was teaching Chinese politicians regarding how to survive in an era when war had become a systemic instrument of power at that time. So moral reasoning was not useful, okay, in his thinking. Then down to the Greek times. The Greek times, there was famous Greek philosopher, and he left a book. He left a book which is analyzes Peloponnesian War, right? In analyzing that war, again, he focused on relative power among different Greek city-states. This was how he analyzed the international politics of the Greek city-state system. I have a roster today. What did this famous Greek philosopher say about the international politics of the Greek city-state system? Gentlemen, what did he say? Quote unquote, what did he say about Greek international politics? Thucydides, famous philosopher. Gentleman from, second from the right. What did he say? Can you speak up a little bit? Okay, I mean, you can read it. Quote unquote, the strong do what they have the power to do, right? And the weak, what do the weak do? The weak accept, right? The weak accept, okay? This is what international politics is all about. Although a little bit cruel, but that's what it is. Now down to the Renaissance period. Who was there in the Renaissance period? In Italy, Machiavelli, around 1500. Niccolo Machiavelli, right? Niccolo Machiavelli. He was, again, urging politicians to, right, manipulate, right, using power, manipulating different people, different, actors, how to survive, to stay in power. Okay. Now, then the modern English philosopher, Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes. What his theory is known as? His theory is known as the state of nature. Thomas Hobbes' theory is known as the state of nature. According to him, what is the state of nature is like? His state of nature is like a harmony and community of good-willed human beings? Or is the state of nature is like an animal, like a war of all against all, right? The state of nature is the state of war, right? It's like the law of the jungle. So having read these famous historical philosophers, I think what they have in common is that in understanding international politics and also in understanding domestic politics, right? What comes first is how do they view human nature is important. According to them, do they think that human nature is good or bad? Human nature is bad, right? Human nature is bad. Humans are ill-natured, right? They are greedy, right? So, again, to read from chapter 1, there's the collective action problems, right? The only way to resolve collective action problems is we need someone very powerful at the top, who give orders, right? Because on their own, human beings, they can't resolve their own problems. So people like Thomas Hobbes, he says we need people like Leviathan on top, who rules over, right, those who are weak. These are classical. These are people who are known as classical realists, okay? From Chinese, Greek, right, European thinkers. These are known as classical realists. Classical realists, they are based on, among other things, human nature perspective, okay? After World War II, who succeeds these classical theorists, classical realist theorists? Famous, very famous, European-born American political scientist, Hans Morgenthau, who emigrated to the United States. Hans Morgenthau succeeded these classical realists. Then he proposes more sophisticated realist international theories. He argued, I'm reading from 6th line from the top, page 44. According to Hans Morgenthau, international politics is governed by objective and universal laws. I think this is important. He goes one step further than classical thinkers. Classical thinkers, they're based on, again, human nature, okay? But he goes one step further. He tries to analyze international politics from more objective perspective. And he says, international politics is governed by objective and universal laws based on national interests. And these national interests are derived from power. So realism becomes a little bit systemic, more scientific. Okay? International politics is more standardized. Okay? There are some universal and systemic laws and principles. And again, psychological motives of decision makers are not important. This is what it means. Scientific meaning, psychological aspects of different decision makers are not important. And there is no universal morality, according to him. Now then we can, oh yeah, question?
Are they looking at the international in terms of survival of the fittest, or are they thinking this is human-specific conflict between nation and state worldwide?
Say that again?
Are they
I didn't quite get your point.
Basic thing in every creature, that survival of the fittest, or are they saying this is human-specific at world level?
Well, I think the main goal of realists, realists is that, states, like I said, from social perspective, states have too many different qualities, and too many different leaders, Then in terms of why wars break up, in terms of why peace doesn't occur, in explaining that, if you consider all these different, characteristics of states, and even different psychological aspects of different decision makers, then you don't get nowhere. You don't get anywhere. The beauty of realism, okay, if you operate from national interest defined in terms of power, the beauty of that is that you can come up with a coherent, systematic theory where, okay, in certain situations wars occur, in certain situations peace dominates. That's the contribution of realists after World War II. And we'll get there, just a little bit, we'll get there. Now, so realism has this long history of tradition, and particularly realism developed in reaction to a liberal tradition, which is called idealism. This will come up in chapter 3, but to briefly preview liberalism. Liberalism has these opposite qualities. Idealism or liberalism emphasizes, as opposed to realism, international law, morality, international organizations, rather than power alone. And like I said, the basis of liberalism and idealism is international relations, is a community of different states. Okay? Different states have different social systems. Okay? Different cultures, ideas, ideologies. Okay? And they consider this into consideration. And harmony is possible. Okay? And realism, liberalism, has a decisive effect on international relations in what period? Particularly active between World War I, World War II. I mentioned this, 1919, 1939. The period between two wars, global two wars, World War I, World War II, liberalism prospered, idealism prospered. Okay, there was a high expectation. There was a high expectation for peace, community, which resulted in drastic fiasco. Because for idealists, the principal ideal must flow from morality. Go to table 2.1. This is a summary table comparing major assumptions of realism and idealism. First, about human nature, like I said, realists, their assumption is the human nature. Humans are selfish, okay? They pursue their own self-interest. And idealism, human nature, is not necessarily bad, okay? And humans are altruistic. They're good-natured. In terms of actors, realists, I think the most important decisive character of realism is justice. The state is the unitary actor, most important actor. It cannot be dissected. The state cannot be dissected. This is very important. Unitary and rational. Unitary and rational. They themselves decide what constitutes national interests. It's kind of interesting how different individuals have different self-interests, right? And these different self-interests of individuals add up to collective national interests. They don't care about this process. But the state, the government knows what that is because they are rational. Okay? And international politics, what matters is this state-defined national interest. This is what it means. The state as a unitary, rational actor. But on the other hand, liberals, idealists, they have different view on this. The state is not the only unitary actor. There are many different actors. And they care more about the process. Liberals, they care more about the process of aggregating individual self-interest to national interest. They might think that there's no such thing as national interest from liberals' perspective. They care more about the aggregation process. So in so doing, they think sub-state actors are more important from liberals' perspective. Individuals themselves or social groups, they are more important actors. And that's why they think that in the world where the state is not the only actor, harmony and peaceful community of different individuals is made possible. So probably why international politics is anarchy, why wars occur. There are many different theories and studies, but probably wars break up and peace is not maintained, probably because anarchy is what states make of it, right? If you look at the state from the bottom up, you can answer the question as to when and why wars break up and when and why peace is maintained. This is what liberals think about, idealists think about. And this is how they reflected on the global order during 1919, 1939. Which resulted, like I said, in drastic, huge fiasco. Because that's not how the states operate. At that time, at least, 1919, 1939, right? This was not basis on which at least Germany and Italy operated, or Japan, right? And causes of state behavior. What drives state behavior? What drives state behavior? Like I said, rational pursuit of self-interest for realists. And for idealists, here it says psychological motives of decision makers. Decision makers. Psychological motives of decision makers. What does this mean? What does this mean in explaining important international events like wars, like 9/11, things like that? Events of great significance. These two different views have totally different perspectives, right? like for instance 911, if realists look at it, 911, you first look at the power of the United States, okay, or national interests of the United States, or the power of Bin Laden terrorist organization. This is how realists look at it. Whereas idealists, the other extreme view is that 911 happened, then the first thing you need to look at it is, well, I mean, how did Bin Laden, you know, first of all, psychologically, was he like a psycho? I mean, his psychological makeup. Or I think not purely psychological, but the decision makers' thinking. That's important. That's what it matters for idealist analysis, for liberals analysis. Or social makeup, social structure in Afghanistan. That's what it matters from liberals' perspective in explaining 911, rather than power, right? Corrupt society. So psychological decision maker or domestic social structure, religion, this is what, right, matters. Religion, culture, right, which was regarded by realists, right? These are important things for liberals. And essentially, nature of international system for realists, anarchy. Okay, anarchy. We'll cover that, what anarchy means, just a little bit. But idealists, the nature of international relations is peace and harmony and community. Yes. What's your name? Yunsul Chan.
I have a question. I didn't really understand the part of when you said social structure.
Social structure.
Why is that exactly about idealists?
Okay. Right. So you are asking, just forget it. I mean, just forget, you know, social structure equals liberalism. Okay, just forget it. But in understanding international politics, okay, in understanding international politics, there's several things to look at. Okay, to grow for the international system, right? What should you look at? You should first look at, you know, who are the leaders, right? We want to know who are the leaders, right? There are different leaders. And inside the country, there are different social groups, right? Different social groups. I think these have effects on international politics, right? Different social groups and different religions, right? And all different countries have different history, different weather, different climate. I think these are all the subjects of international analysis, right? Social structure, yes, it's important. Social structure is important, which is, like I said, which is studied under the subdiscipline called comparative politics, right?
That's idealism.
Yes, somehow, this is how we categorize different theoretical frameworks. Somehow, those who look at these different qualities of different states, including leaders, people, culture, history, these are known. This kind of attitude is known, okay, is known as liberal perspective, or idealist perspective, or social perspectives, okay, which is contrasted to the other view known as realists. Realists, they don't care about what happens inside the states. And even they think that, realists think that if you care about the domestic makeup, it'll mess up international politics. It'll be miscalculation. Like in 1990, 1939, it was a huge miscalculation at that time. Okay? It was a huge, dangerous miscalculation about international politics. Okay? From the bottom up, right, from the individuals up to social groups, up to some grandiose world government, League of Nations, things like that, then you extract artificial condition where peace is derived. That's dangerous. That was the miscalculation of international scholars at that time, later turned out to be liberals during 1919, 1939. They didn't calculate exactly, okay, they didn't calculate exactly what the political leaders at that time were up to, including Nazi, Hitler, things like that. Right? What matters instead, what matters is calculation based on power. That's what it matters. Okay? And modern realist thinkers, they found out if you analyze international politics from power, there is another additional beauty, which is you can come up with a scientific international politics. Scientific. In other words, scientific meaning you can predict what will happen. Liberals, you cannot predict. Why? There are so many factors. Okay? Like for instance, you know about the psychology of Hitler. Okay? You know about psychology of Stalin. Okay? You studied about it. But based on that, you never ever predict what will happen. Like 2000, 2010. Okay? That's the weakness of liberal theories. But realists, you can. Because realists are scientific. And that tradition Hans Morgenthau built. From human nature theory to scientific realism. This is how realism evolved. Now, power, defining power. Power is a central concept in international relations, particularly central for realists. But is it easy to measure? No. It's so difficult to define and measure. Power is oftentimes defined two ways. Power is often defined as the ability to get another actor to do what it would not otherwise have done. This is known as power as influence. Power, the first definition, power as influence. Okay? In other words, a powerful state is a state that can get their way. Okay? Powerful state is a state that can influence other states. That's simple. This is a definition of power as influence. But power as influence is not sufficient definition. It's insufficient definition. Because you can't measure power only by the influence, the amount of influence you have on other states, right? Because influence is always relative, right? So we need more objective definition, which is power as opposed to power as influence, power as, in this case, capabilities. Power as capabilities. More objective measure. So here, based on specific, either tangible or intangible, specific characteristics or possessions of states, this is power as capabilities. So, let me ask you, power as capabilities, there are two sides, the two aspects, power as capabilities. One, material power, right? Material power. Second, non-material power, right? Power as capabilities, two things. Power, non-material power, material power. Material power, in order for a state to become powerful, it should be relatively big, right? Size, economically prosperous, level of income, and military should be powerful, armed forces. So, population, territory, military force. But what is the best single indicator of a state's power? This is the question. What is the best indicator of a state's power as a capability, which is material? GDP, economic power, which is, right, GDP. The second question. Second question. So the best single indicator of a state is GDP. Okay, you remember that. But realists, from realist perspective, what is the most important indicator of a state's power? From realist perspective, military force. Military force. Okay, realists, they see military force as the most important indicator of a national power. Then non-material power. What are non-material power? So a state has economic power, high level of GDP income, then you have a strong army. Then is it enough to become a powerful state? No, you need many more, right? Unseen, non-material elements of power, like, people should support the government, right? People should support the government, right? Like Kim Jong-un, right? He has a strong army, he has a weapon, right? But he has a weak economy, right? But he can survive because his citizens still support him somehow, right? And he tries to build up legitimacy, right? He tries to build up legitimacy, right? He tries to give the image that he's a good guy, he's a good leader. As long as he gives that impression, he's in power. That's non-material power, right? Support. support legitimacy, which is important. More and more so is non-material power, more and more important over time. Again, state power is a mix of many different ingredients. Right? State power is a mixture of many different ingredients. The second aspect, all covered. Okay. The difference between long-term power and short-term power. Okay? This is another dimension. There are the long-term power elements, short-term power elements. Right? These are long-term power elements. Natural resources, industrial capacity, popular support, these are long-term ingredients. Okay? Long-term elements of power. These are long-term elements of power. Right? Long-term meaning you can't build up that kind of power overnight. Right? That's long-term power. Takes time to build that type of power. That's long-term power. Right? Takes time to build that. That's long-term power. Whereas short-term power these are short-term power. Short-term power. And this textbook explains how Japan was based on short-term power in challenging the United States, World War II. Japan built up short-term power very quickly. Then, challenged the United States, but the United States got on top at the end because the U.S. power was much more long-term. That's how the United States, fought back, right? Then win, ultimately. That's how long-term power is important. Finally, page 49. Page 49. Geography. Geography. The lady from second from the left. What's your name? Let me ask you. This textbook argues that the use of geography as an element of power is called geopolitics. Okay? In other words, geography oftentimes used as power. Location, meaning location is important. Do you see any examples where states use, not you, this lady, states use geography, their location, using their own location or geography as power? Give us some examples of how geography becomes power element. Then, what's your name? What do you think? Is geography important as a power? how countries use geography as power source. Give us some examples. Modern day example or historic examples. In other words, put differently, do you see any country where their power is downgraded? In other words, they are weak because they are geographically unlucky. They're located in a very bad, disadvantaged location, so that their power never becomes powerful. Do you see any states? Or the other way around, do you see any states where all other elements of power are not that excellent, but their location gives them a huge benefit? Do you see any states like that? Yunsul-chan.
Okay, so maybe like location itself. China has a location where they give where they spread yellow dust to Korea and Japan. I think that can also be a sort of way of power.
Wow, giving bad air to neighboring states. That becomes power.
They kind of tend to be, so we try to negotiate with them to try to do something.
Sure.
Areas, and we give them funds.
Maybe, yeah, sure. What's your name? Ibyong-chul. What do you think?
When I think about the world geopolitics, I thought about European Union because they're all closely together and they unite under one name, and they also share their market, so their power is greater than other countries because they're been combined through because of their geographical state.
Okay. So you're saying that EU is a kind of the work of based on European countries that are separate, okay, originally, but they are united because they try to exploit some of the locational advantages. So in that sense, EU is a kind of a outcome of some kind of geopolitical motives. Okay. Let's take some from here.
I guess Singapore could be an example for using geography because their location is in between Europe and Asia, so they're famous for
Singapore?
Singapore.
Okay, right. Singapore is, in my opinion, Singapore is at a very advantageous position where many shipping concentrated, right, from the North American side all the way through, right, the straits near Singapore, then up to traveling, right, to this region. In that sense, I think Singapore, right, that's how finance developed, right, in mediating trade between American states and Asia Pacific countries. Yeah, that's geographic, locational benefits, advantages. Singapore enjoy. Any bad cases where their location is so disadvantageous so that they can't grow as a country. The country, they're just stuck. They're just stuck so that the country cannot grow, right, in many ways as a country. What examples there? Yes?
As we talked today about the realist, so as I said before, realist cares about defensive, for defensive reason and attacking reason. So a good example here is United States, because they deploying or allocating the anti-aircraft system in the European Union, because they worrying about Russia, and Russia also deploying some air aircraft system like in Antarctic region because it's so near to the United States. So it's whether the geopolitics is a kind of a game when you have like a strategy of like you can fastly defend yourself, and on the other hand you can also attack or counterattack. Yes, you have to see what's going on right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Deploying the military capabilities in
Right.
other regions. What I'm trying to say right now.
Right. You know what? In deciding on, in deciding on different paths, different economic development path, or social, or power development path, there's so many different factors that decide on countries, right? Fortunes. But of all the factors, what is more decisive than the location? This is kind of thinking I have. What is more decisive than location? Because every other thing you are able to change. You are able to change. But the location, you can never, ever be able to change. Right? So, very decisive. Weather, location, I mentioned this before, the previous class, very decisive. On economic development or social structure, culture, right? It has a very decisive effect on how countries evolve. Let me give you one good example of how countries are disadvantages by location. The country you're coming from, Central Asian countries. Their location is so bad. Central Asian countries, their location is so bad. Number one, surrounded by very greedy, big countries. They're surrounded by them. There's Russia, there's China, there's Turkey, right? There's Iran, right? It used to be an empire. It's surrounded by these big countries, right? Then second thing, those small, right? Those small states in Central Asia, they're also disadvantageous because they can't trade. They can't communicate with outsiders. In order to have an outlet to the outside world, either to the huge open sea, right, or transportation, line, you need to at least pass several countries. Many of which are necessarily friends, right? So, that's Central Asian countries. And there are many examples where location itself explains the politics itself, international politics. And every country tries to use it to their benefit because the location doesn't change. Take a short break and come back to finish. You're finished until page 53 today. Page 49. Page 49. What is contained in this section, the section on the international system. Here we have learned so far realism and liberalism. The key thing about what we have learned so far is, this is key. what we learned about international politics is international politics is composed of different actors, although the state is the most important actor. Right? The most important actor. The most important philosophical question is how, when the international politics is composed of these different actors, how order is derived. That's the question. That's the real question. Realist answer, order is derived because the state, okay, because the state as a unitary actor, okay, and the state constitutes the system, the international system. Then the question, how could the state pursuing their own self-interest, okay, how the state end up with some kind of rules of the game, rules of the game. The state pursuing their own self-interest don't result in chaotic wars, right? How is it possible? How is it possible where states all pursuing their own self-interest, not resulting in chaotic wars? Here, the system, the international system, the definition. The states interact within a set of established rules of the game. Rules of the game. These rules shape the international system. There are three essential things that constitute the international system. Okay? Number one, anarchy. Number one, anarchy. Number two, sovereignty. Sovereignty. Number three, balance of power. Anarchy, sovereignty, balance of power. These three things, these are rules, principles, norms of the realistic international system. These are rules, principles, norms. So in order for a system to work, you need rules, principles, norms, right? So there are three essential rules, principles, and norms. Anarchy, sovereignty, balance of power. Then let's get to what is anarchy, right? What is anarchy? As a principle, I think, as a principle. Sovereignty as a norm, as a norm. Balance of power, maybe rules. So they are either rules, principles, norms. The most important norm in the international system is sovereignty. Sovereignty. Okay, sovereignty. Let's get to each of them. Anarchy. Anarchy is a very elusive concept and oftentimes misunderstood by many people. The international system you see, realists believe the international system exists in a state of anarchy. international system exists in a state of anarchy. What does anarchy mean? Does anarchy mean a complete chaos? Lack of order? Right? Is this kind of the state of nature coined by Thomas Hobbes? Anarchy is neither lack of order nor complete chaos. It simply means the lack of a central government. That's what it is. Anarchy means the lack of central government. That's all. The lack of a central government. There is no enforcement mechanism. That's all. Okay? But the question is how the international system is maintained without that. That's the question. How is the international system maintained without the lack of a central government? Because we can never ever imagine a domestic society without a central government. We can't imagine, right? But the international system, unlike domestic society, some level of order possible, much more than possible, even without the lack of a central government. That's the difference between the international system, domestic governance, domestic society. Later, you will see why some kind of order is possible under the realist world, under the realist system. How order is possible? That is possible because of the norm, sovereignty norm, number one. Second, principle known as balance of power. Because of balance of power, order is possible in the international system because of balance of power. The principle known as balance of power, and the norm known as sovereignty. That's how order is maintained. So then you will ask, without the lack of central government, world government is needed? You will naturally ask, is the world government needed? But even without the world government, like I said, order is possible. As long as the principle, balance of power, works. Or international organizations or international agreements. Despite anarchy, the international system is not chaotic because of that. There are some norms of behavior, right, to which states adhere. States comply with some norms of behavior. Most important norm, the most important norm under the realist world is sovereignty. The most important norm is sovereignty. Sovereignty means government has the right, in principle, to do whatever it wants within its own territory. This is the sovereignty norm. This is the sovereignty norm. In other words, all states are equal. All states are equal in status, but not in power. although not in power, they're equal in status. That's what the sovereignty means. Second thing, states are not supposed to interfere in the internal affairs of other states. That's the second meaning of the sovereignty. Internal affairs are sacrosanct. That's the sovereignty in the world. In other words, states try to influence other states on matters of trade, war, finance, and these issues, but they are not supposed to meddle in the internal affairs of other states. Okay? That's what the sovereignty means. There's the controversy. There's a controversy surrounding the sovereignty norm. The sovereignty norm is under some challenges. Because most states have a harder and harder time expelling outside interference in internal affairs, particularly on internal affairs such as human rights, democratic governance, self-determination, and on these issues. In other words, sovereignty doesn't give bad leaders the right to treat their own citizens badly. So the sovereignty norm is under significant challenge today. Now, get to balance of power. Balance of power, page 52. Definition of the balance of power. The general concept of one or more states' power being used to balance that of another state or a group of states. Let's look at another. Balance of power can refer to any ratio of power capabilities between states or alliances, or it can mean only a relatively equal ratio. Alternatively, it can refer to the process by which counterbalancing coalitions have repeatedly formed in history to prevent one state from conquering an entire region. So the theory of balance of power means counterbalancing occurs regularly and maintains stability of the international system. It doesn't mean peace, but rather a stability maintained by means of recurring wars that adjust power relations. So far you might not understand what it means, but let me finish up. Alliances are key. Okay? Because alliances are more quicker, cheaper means of building one's own capabilities. But states do not always balance against the strongest actor. Bandwagoning also possible versus balancing. Now, so far, having looked at this, do you get the sense that how order is maintained through this process? This is a very American style of looking at international relations. How order is maintained. You know, there's a big power, and when big power rises, then smaller powers make alliances. Okay? Then they challenge this big power. Then power is balanced. Okay? So that the system becomes stable, right? Although these weak powers, they don't always balance against big powers. Sometimes they bandwagon, okay, with these big powers. Let me finish up this on Friday a little bit. Then we'll finish up the rest of chapter 2 on Friday. Okay. Then next Tuesday, liberal theories. Okay. Then quiz. Okay. Then come back. Then chapter 4, right? Chapter 5, chapter 6, quiz. Okay.